Hello and a very good afternoon to you all. The time is 3 p.m. It is Sunday 29th of September and I have the privilege of sitting in for Brian Faulkner today, usually answering the vet's questions. So no veterinary expertise from me, but I will do my very best to answer your dog behaviour questions today. So as always, I have my friendly helper behind the camera. Today it's Kim. We have in the office tea, coffee, we even have a candle burning, giving us the lovely smell of sea salt apparently, so I feel like I'm at the seaside. So anyway, Kim, fire away with the first question. Let's see how we go.
Okay, we have a question here from Becky. Hi Nick, you previously came to us to help with our reactive dog Scarlet, and unfortunately she passed away due to cancer. We have since got a Sprocker. We got him at 8 weeks and he's now 2.5 years old. Such a lovely personality. However, he is so obsessed with tennis balls. If he sees someone carrying one on a walk, he tries to jump up and snatch it. I always take one on a walk in case, and I've been told by the vet he can't chase tennis balls as he has a bad leg. I don't know how to stop him snatching and I worry he'll catch someone's hand. Thanks in advance.
Yes, okay. Lovely to hear from you, Becky, and I'm sorry to hear of Scarlet. It's a sad reality of life, isn't it, that our dogs are never with us long enough. Okay, so you now have a new Sprocker. Congratulations, a Springer cross Cocker Spaniel, one of the definitely more energetic breeds, and having that love for the tennis ball, I'm not surprised at all. So many of our dogs have passionate obsessions with certain things, and that's okay to a good degree, but of course we need to manage such behaviours. And as you rightly say, well, you've got two issues potentially. One is that your dog may rudely try to snatch the ball from somebody else's, or a ball from somebody else's hand, if your dog's quite sociable in that way. So you may have a accidentally bitten hand, which is not what we want, of course. And also your dog is under instructions not to be jumping around and to have some rest. So another good reason to ensure that, you know, your dog isn't just wildly out of control chasing balls. Dogs don't have something that many humans have, and that is in essence this sense of looking after themselves. Dogs are extremely stoic, meaning that they will still do things even if they're experiencing discomfort or pain. They tend to just focus in on what they want, and that's it, they're going for it. And the ball, of course, can be very much along those lines. Little Pip, my Border Terrier, has a bit of a ball obsession, less avid with it these days because she's 13, so there isn't much jumping up and flat out chasing of balls, but I can certainly relate to the problem. It's important that your dog is polite regardless of what he or she is doing, so always get your dog to sit before you ask your dog to relinquish the ball, or indeed before you give a ball to the dog. So putting in a little bit of control around those sorts of games can make all the difference, okay? So sit, ask your dog always, and this works very well on a prevention as well as a cure level, as many when you take the cure part of advice, if you were to apply that to a young dog, then very often you'll find that will prevent it from occurring in the first place, by the way. So yes, sit to take the ball, ask your dog to sit to give the ball. Now, getting your dog to give the ball may be easier said than done, so this can also be looked at by ensuring that the dog understands the hold and, more importantly, the give command. So practicing the give of any item can be really worthwhile training to put into place. So think about just doing some give sort of loops, if you like, of you give the device, whatever it is, whether it's a ball or a chew or something, to your dog whilst you say hold. And then most dogs, especially of the gun dog nature, which yours is, will hold the item. We'll also know that we're using an item that the dog is quite keen for. So the hold shouldn't be too much difficulty, but then the give where we're using a slightly lower tone of voice rather, is important. So getting the hold and give when things are nice and calm and quiet in the home can make a big difference, because then you can employ that hold and, more importantly, the give. You could replace the give with drop it or dead, words that you prefer, and so you know that if your dog's getting it right in a calm home environment, then you stand a much better chance of obtaining the item in public as well. So I may be drifting off beam a little, because you were saying how your dog grabs the ball. So, but it is important that if your dog has manners around such items like the ball, then he's going to be much less likely to try to grab it. If the problem really is serious and your dog is running around and quite well known for pinching tennis balls out of people's hands and maybe has caught people, I would actually, it may not be that serious, but of course we don't have the benefit of a conversation unless the live feed is being monitored, unless you can clarify. But if he really is quite naughty in that sense, then you might short term, i.e. a month or two, look at muzzling your dog, not because he's aggressive, but it will prevent him from pinching things, and also to place a long line on your dog and whilst you're practicing the recall. Because one could also say, well, if you see your dog going up to somebody and you're calling him, you're thinking, oh, I want to call him back. How good is that recall? If it's not that good, or if it's not good enough, then let's focus on the recall for a time. Use high value food and a combination of the line, and the line is there to help enforce the recall should your dog ignore you. So you can just stand on the line, lift the line up, give a gentle tug, get your dog's attention again, and once you have that attention, if really necessary, you could wind him in using the long line. So regardless of what your dog wants to do, you should be able to stop him, to call him back, walk him to heel, away from the issue altogether, or maybe into that area under more control. So I'm just sort of going out of the immediate remit and showing you how, by looking at other areas of your dog's training, that can help prevent the problem in the future. Okay, I think that covers it. So it sort of kills two birds with one stone, really, by implementing those methods, because you've got control of your dog. He's learning how to take items and not actually stealing them from you. And of course, you need to ensure that as you're holding the ball, if your dog's jumping up at you, I would have the line on there, and I would stand on the line. I would stop the jumping. Right, now sit down, we'll get that calm coming in, and once the calm is there, we can reward the calm behaviour. If you are even allowing, because some dog owners will complain about certain behaviours, but actually when we analyse it, we find that the owner may have even encouraged some of it. So sort of holding the ball here and jump, catch the ball, and before we know it, we have a bit of a problem. So stop any of that, get your dog to sit, there's the ball, good boy, and that line will give you that control as well. And those techniques will also allow you to manage your dog's behaviour under the heading of taking some rest and under vet's orders. Couple of quick points, and I meant to say this at the beginning. No ball play in the house is my advice with ball obsessed dogs, because the obsession can become a problem. There's a little fine line between my dog's mad for something and then my dog is so obsessed that he won't settle, it's constantly in his mind. If you've got balls in the house and you're throwing them up and down the room or the hallway, that will only feed into that obsession, which we don't want. In my humble opinion, the home should be a place for a calm relaxation. So you do all the exercise out of the home. In the home, our dog should be resting, sleeping, maybe chewing something. You know, it's a much calmer feeling. Any sort of feedback, Kim, on that particular question?
No, Nick. We have a couple of questions that are more veterinary, and to Julie and Sue who sent those questions in, we will deal with those.
Yeah.
But with Nick, we do focus very much on pet behaviour.
Yes, it's all behaviour, folks. I can't, I'm afraid, answer any direct vet questions. Dog care and general dog husbandry we could potentially touch on, but nothing of a veterinary nature, I'm afraid. So shall we move on to the next question?
Yes.
Yeah, fire away.
Slightly related, but a different question is from Lisa. She says that Nala has recently started to sneeze and then bark every time they all sit down at the table to eat.
Yes.
She does this sometimes in the evening for attention. Then we do play with her. But it's dinner time and our time to eat. She does sometimes jump up, but we tell her down and she listens after a couple of times. She hasn't had a season yet and seems to enjoy barking. Okay. Any advice would be great.
Lovely. Thank you for that question, Lisa. As you know, we've followed each other's progress on our puppies. They're a similar age. Little Ruby, who's out today having a walk, so no holding up, I'm afraid. Is just a couple of months older, I think, than Nala. Okay, so the rule. Don't be frightened of the word rules. You know, young dogs especially benefit greatly from sensible, well-balanced rules that we consistently put in place. And when we have a rule that is sensible and that we use it on a regular basis, we can then show the dog very clearly what is and isn't allowed. Okay, and we can do all of that in a nice, calm, orderly way without having to shout at the dog, without having to lose our patience with the dog. Dogs tend to perpetuate or carry on with things that they get something out of it. So when a dog's doing a little bit of barking, then it usually, and you find that that's persisting over a period of time in a certain situation, you'll find that your dog is getting something out of it. Some dogs will happily take negative responses, such as your dog barks, you're all trying to eat your meal, and then one of you or a couple of you are saying, no, go and lie down, and the dog's getting some sort of interaction, okay? What we want to do is just take it to a point where the dog isn't really getting any responses, and it knows that all those efforts in that environment are futile. So I'm using my imagination a little with this question, but if, for example, you have a dining room or a place which is set, and this goes to all people that eat with their and have dogs in the house at the same time, I find in my day-to-day work looking at behaviour problems with dogs is that they are one of two situations. Either one, the owners are sitting in front of the TV eating on their laps, which is not unheard of for us to do that, or two, you may be sitting up at a dining room table as a family or a couple, what have you, and we do that as well. Either way, the basic rule that I have in place is that the dog isn't allowed within, say, 6 feet of us. That's a bit of a bare minimum. I am not a fan of dogs being under the table whilst we're eating meals, simply because it's going to happen. One day a carrot whips off your plate as you're trying to catch it, and the dog gets that sort of very, very occasional reward. And so just for best practice, and I'm a fan of thinking about best practice, I like the dogs to be out from under the table, ideally on their own bed. You know, the dog should be relaxed. So if we have a dining room, I would find a corner of that room sufficiently away from the table, and that I lead the dog into the room to place the dog on the bed, to do a sit, a stay. So actually coming back, it would be on your bed. That's the first command. Second is sit. Third command is stay. All right, or it might be sit down, stay. Don't need to think about it too much. Now, if your dog will reliably, Lisa, stay upon the stay command, and maybe with a beady eye whilst you're eating, if you see her getting up and she moves off, your reaction would be, bed, lie down and stay. All right, so that's simple as that. Now, if you have a very big dog, or if the dog is very determined not to stay on the bed and to come and woof at you or to be under the table, you could place a lead on the dog, and depending on the size of the dog, you could either just hook that lead back to something like a well-fixed radiator, or if the dog is bigger, you may need to consider a sort of 2-3 inch metal plate with a D-ring protruding from it, and that you can fix that onto the wall, and then you can have a nice slack lead between the wall and the dog is then sitting in its bed. All right? So incidentally, this is just, the fixing point method is just a nice calm means of maintaining that control whilst you eat your meal. Ignore the dog whilst you're eating. Suffice to say, with this sort of behaviour, no feeding the dog during or immediately after, because that could build up an association in your dog's mind that, you know, this is a time when your dog gets some of your food. Any leftovers, healthy leftovers, vegetables, meaty scraps, things of that nature, I personally, and it is a personal thing, there's no specific way of doing this, but I personally put them into a bowl, and then it goes in the fridge, and then it will be incorporated into the next meal. So I'm not actually feeding my dogs around meal times, okay? I should add that I very, very rarely leave food on my plate, so the dogs very, very rarely have the treat of my food. So that's a good, just general thoughts for you. So if the dog's in the same room as you, whether you're eating on your lap or in a lounge up at a table type situation, the dog should be on its own bed, okay, and that you insist on the sit or the down stay for the duration of your meal. It sort of bleeds out a little bit, the subject of food and dogs in the home. Ensure that, because of the way lots of homes are planned these days, and lots of kitchens are open plan and we can move from the kitchen, dining room into the lounge, dogs are able to sort of flow everywhere, and it can make it quite difficult to have no-go areas with our dogs. The way my own home is configured is that my kitchen, I can close doors, and so I have an enclosed kitchen, I have an enclosed lounge. It's purely coincidental, this. But that door at the kitchen does allow me to shut it if necessary during the preparation and serving of food. But in any event, the dogs are not allowed in the kitchen when food is being prepared, served or tidied away, okay? So that's something for safety and for good practice as well, so we don't have a dog that's begging. I do not encourage a dog to be under your feet whilst you're cooking. I really think it's dangerous as well. Knives, hot pans, people can and have tripped over in the past with a dog under their feet. Or you know, you're chopping carrots on the side and you look over and your dog's sort of standing up at the work surface. In some respects, these things aren't really a problem, but actually, if you have other areas which are a bit problematic, we could incorporate that type of behaviour into the problem as well. So none of those things should be happening. Dogs out of the kitchen, out from under your feet, even if it's an open plan kitchen. I've had success with incorporating a bed in the corner of the kitchen so the dog can just stay there, watch you, be a part of the ongoing situation, and that can be quite nice. And I'd be quite okay, it's quite okay for you to periodically walk over to your dog, drop a little scrap of biscuit I'm really thinking of, dog appropriate treats, to reward that position, okay? It's also, I think, okay to give your dog a chew or something dog appropriate when it's in the bed and when you're eating. So a dog, it was a bit of an old-fashioned thing a few years ago whereby we should all eat before our dogs. There was even something called gesture eating, where we should demonstrate to our dogs that we're eating a biscuit or something, or even food out of its food bowl, so as to express some higher ranking position than the dogs. I think I've seen many people do that, and I've actually seen no improvement whatsoever if there are any problems. What is important around food and the human consumption of food is that your dog is away from you, it understands the rules, your dog is being polite when you're eating. That, in my view, is really what counts. Naturally, when your dog is eating, you don't stare at him looking for a bit of his food. So, you know, the same should take place I believe, when you are eating. So also finally, barking for attention. I won't go into great detail, but suffice to say that, you know, if your dog is barking at you, just be careful the way the flow of that attention is leading in your relationship. I know Nala is a lovely dog, but just watch out that it is attention on your terms, especially if you sense that the dog is being a little, how do we say, dictating a little bit when and how things are happening. So it's okay to periodically ignore your dog if it's barking, or maybe to say, no, away on your bed, lie down, stay. But for that to work, of course, you need a little bit of a send to bed command, which is very, very simple to look at. And most smart dogs, Nala being one of them, will be able to pick that up, okay? So, quite a broad, you know, as always, we have that centre of the question, but it's not as simple as, you know, how to stop it isn't just as localised. It's often the preparing of food and what sort of arrangements you have when you're eating as well. But try to pick up the essence of what I was saying about having a set place for your dog. In our home, when food comes out, all of the dogs have to get either off the sofas or onto beds, into corners of the room, and you know we've always done that with all of our dogs. So good luck. I love that. I don't think we've discussed that area before, actually, about feeding times for humans, and there can be a lot of problems around that. So it's a great question. Thank you very much, Lisa. How are we doing, Kim? Anything else coming through?
Actually, we have a little comment from Paula which may help. Our dog automatically gets in her bed when we start cooking and knows she will get her treat. So
that's fine. I mean, if your dog is in the bed, in the kitchen, waiting for a scrap of something that you're preparing, I don't directly have a problem with that. But I may, if there are other problems associated in the home, then we may actually say, well, that's something that we could tidy up, and that idea of best practice comes in again. So a lot of what we do under the heading of best practice, some of it may not be entirely necessary, but we don't want to take chances with our dogs. We want to show them that these are the balanced, sensible rules that we live in with this household, and that if you have those ideas as an owner and that you stick to them, then actually really what you're doing, it's a huge exercise in prevention, because prevention is always better than cure. Once your dog, and again, Lisa, this comes back to you with Nala, because I know she's about 10 months at a guess, but once you get to 12 months and maybe beyond, you are likely to be looking at your dog, as I am with my Ruby, thinking, there, she's got it, she understands the lay of the land, and now we can relax a little bit more. We don't have to be so obsessive about sending her off the bed, or onto her bed, or getting her off the sofa, because actually we can say, come on, off. And you know, all those similar, the dogs know that food is being prepared for humans, and if you have a real nice consistent approach to these things for life from puppyhood, and I realise not everybody has a dog from puppy, but even so we can still employ the same methodologies, that you know, it can avoid so many issues. Okay. Now, you all don't have the benefit of the lovely aroma that my candle is emitting, but in here it's placid, it's lovely. What else do we have, Kim?
We've got a cat question, actually, Nick.
Question.
It's from Claire. She has a 6-year-old boy cat which sprays around the house on washing and carrier bags, etc. Plants and cars in the driveway.
Ooh.
She has a busy cat. I have 2 other female cats and foster cats and kittens in my dining room. They don't meet, but can probably smell each other. He's a happy cat and he spends lots of time playing outside. He doesn't appear to be stressed at all. He's very well, but it's an annoying habit.
Is it a tomcat? Is it in? She doesn't.
It's a boy cat.
A boy.
But she doesn't say whether or not he's neutered.
If you could, if you're still watching, if you could pass comment as to whether he's neutered or not, I'd be grateful. The thing is with this sort of situation is that it's like dogs. The neutering of all dogs should be taken on an individual basis. because we need to take into account what the aspirations are for the owner with the dog. You know, are we looking to breed? Yes, but when we're making sort of cat thoughts, there can often be dog issues as well. So, so the way, so my thinking really there is that what we thinking we apply to a cat can also work to dogs as well. So I'd be interested to know if your cat is neutered or not.
Claire's come back in, he is neutered.
He is neutered, okay. So you may well find that, you know, spraying of that nature could still relate to some stress, and that stress, it sounds as like you're keeping the cats separate from each other, and that in itself may be a slightly stressful experience for your cat. It's very difficult if your cat's going out and spraying on all of these different items and he is castrated, then I think I'd be looking at the more emotional element for your cat. You know, also making sure there's enough litter trays in the home, that the cats have all got their own space. And space, because with cats generally, the more we get of them, the more complicated that dynamic can become. And it sounds like he's spraying in the home as well, isn't he, Kim?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that's something that's quite unpleasant for you to have to deal with. Speak to your vet in regard of some calming remedies. Some of them are only available through a vet. I'm not thinking drugs here, but more sort of nutritional supplements. So there are some products on the market that only vets supply, and I think that would be something I'd look into as well. I think I'm in the sense of going much further than that. I think probably going to draw a line there, because it's the sort of thing I really need a longer conversation with so I can get a better grasp. But I suspect there's something else going on just under the surface that may be disturbing your cat a little. Especially if I'd like to know if you know, that problem is sort of has been better in the past, or you know, where you are currently on the scale of severity, because that then could fit in with what's going on in your cat pack, okay, and that hierarchy. So that's something for you to consider. Feel free to answer below, and I will be able to sort of type a response after today if you don't come back directly. But thank you for the question. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question here. This is an elderly dog who's always a terrier who's always been very quiet, and he started barking more than he ever did. He barks to be taken upstairs, he barks to come in, he barks to go out, and he just seems to, he isn't anxious, he just seems to want to communicate more.
And did she say how old?
The dog is 15.
15, gosh, that's a nice age. Well, my little Pip is 13. Pip is a border terrier. And this is our, as a family, first lesson in, or experience certainly, in living with and looking after a dog which is becoming quite senior. Some dogs, just speaking plainly about the subject, will pass away before they really get into that elderly phase. But on the other hand, we have other dogs like my Pip and your dog that really do experience elderly life, and we can see behaviour changes in them as a result. So my little Pip is, I think she's all but deaf. This year she's gone from probably half to 80–90% deaf, I suspect. So I'm having to use hand signals with her and sort of think a lot more, whereas in the past I'd be able to make little clucking sounds or something to easily get her attention. Now she just is in a world of her own. So we need to think a bit differently with older dogs, and I think this is a part of a challenge for us, because actually it's a case of you having to find or think of new ways of managing your dog and its behaviour. I think as dogs lose their senses as they get older, and this isn't necessarily true, some dogs live with all of it, like people, you know, some dogs will go all the way to the end with everything intact, as it were, and no problems at all, whereas others can lose senses as they get older. But I think for a dog, there must be a degree of anxiety for a dog when they do lose some of these senses, because I find little Pip coming back to her, she can get startled because I'm walking up to her, I'm trying to get her attention, I might just have to tap her on her back, and then she jumps a little bit, and it makes me feel bad because I don't want to startle her. So these sorts of changes on a sensory level for our truly elderly dogs can be quite an adjustment. And we have to maybe make some exceptions to those rules as our dogs get, you know, I think when our dogs are on the two extremes of life, i.e. very young puppies, let's say 4, 5, 6 months and younger, and then 12, 13 years older, those tend to be those real shoulder periods in life where we're going to be making more allowances for our dog's behaviours. So I think you're going to have to roll with it to a degree, is my best friendly advice, because we can have, even with me, even though I have ideas, and I've talked quite a bit today about rules for dogs, sensible rules, but you know, how do we enforce those rules even if the dog can't hear us or maybe see us or something of that nature? So it can be a challenge. But the barking, I would just see what it is that your dog wants and see if you can accommodate it. If you can't accommodate it, then stick to your guns. If you've never ever allowed your dog upstairs, let's say, then I wouldn't necessarily start now. So you being consistent with that sort of approach that you've had for the previous 15 years, I'm assuming, then I would try to stick with them. Try that consistency can really help our dogs, okay? Am I missing anything there, Kim? Because she elaborated a little, but barking to come upstairs, wasn't it?
Yes, I think he seems to almost be able to ask what he wants, that he barks to be taken upstairs. It appears he does go upstairs, and then he barks when he wants to go back down, so perhaps he needs to go to the loo earlier than perhaps he used to, but he seems to know what he wants, and he seems to be getting it. I think it's just that this is a recent development.
Okay, I wouldn't worry too much, provided the barking is done in the spirit of communication, i.e. I want to go out or I want to come upstairs, and I think that's permissible, acceptable, and provided your dog isn't aimlessly barking and that you are unable to sort of satisfy what he wants or is asking for, I wouldn't worry too much. Barking in the middle of the night, barking endlessly at things that you can't seem to establish what they are, that's a little bit more complicated and would be worthy of a real, you know, discussion as to how we could make that easier for you. But in essence, I would say roll with it. Don't worry too much about the increase in barking, especially given that your dog is communicating with you. So I think that's actually a positive thing. Okay, I hope that stands okay for you, and thank you for that question.
Okay, we have another one here. I have a puppy that chews everything. What can I do? It's a nice short one. Nice
short, but massive question, isn't it? So puppies like to explore the world through their mouths and their noses and their ears and their eyes. Everything's very new, but gaining real sensory input through their mouths is an important one. And of course, through the first and second teething phases, those can be very problematic almost for dogs that chew. Some dogs like to chew more than others, and the key thing is to direct your dog's chewing onto things that are permissible or acceptable to chew. What sort of things are good to chew and what sort of things are not good to chew? Well, let's look at those briefly. Things that are good to chew are, of course, dog-specific toys. Take into account the age. Just a couple of months, wasn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't actually.
No, okay, but very young dogs, we need to watch out that they are not given any small things that they could possibly swallow. It depends on the size of your dog, of course. And also watch out, there was a post recently online showing a hollow rubber toy that had some food pushed in it, but the little hole at the top was blocked. Amongst other things, that little hole is a breathing hole, and but this one was blocked for this particular dog, and the dog got its tongue stuck through the vacuum effect. So just watch out for that. We should ideally be supervising our dogs whilst they're chewing on various things. The dogs can chew appropriate chew toys. Depending on what your dog's being fed, either a dry food or maybe a wetter food, you could get either hollow devices that release dried food slowly, or we can get hollow toys which are squeezable and more rubber-like, and that we can fill those with wet food. So those are two good ways of giving your dog an outlet on something that he or she is allowed to chew on, and that's the sort of thing I really encourage. Sort of like ropey, raggy toys with a big knot on each end. It's as old as the hills, but you know, these things are cheap and cheerful, and dogs love them. Again, supervision is important. They can easily begin to pull big sort of knotted threads out of that, or they can get them a little bit caught in their teeth. So we might need to just sort of bin the bits that come off and do a bit of teeth picking depending on what's going on there. So these are the sorts of things that are permissible. One thing is an old bit of advice, this, but I don't advise allowing your dog to chew on your old footwear or an old boot or things like that. Not unless, of course, you don't mind your other shoes being chewed as well. So you may well be able to discriminate between old boot and best going out shoes, but your dog doesn't. So watch out for what you do on that level, and try to ensure. I personally wouldn't give any shoes of any nature, not even, I've seen hide, which are a bit questionable anyway in their quality of a food for a dog, but hide, raw hide made into like a moccasin shape. So anything of that nature I wouldn't do. Things that your dog shouldn't chew, well, in theory, if you are channeling your dog's chewing efforts into some things on the previous list, you're really more than halfway there, because then your dog by definition will find things like remote controls, your trouser leg, or your slippers, or your lady's nightie, anything of that description that a dog could get sort of really excitable over, you're much less likely to have those problems. But what do you do when the dog, because your dog doesn't understand all these differences and rules and things that you do want him to chew and don't want him, and so it can be quite a few months of constant, it would seem, but constant redirecting away from what it that you don't want it to do into something you do want it to do. So don't be frightened if it's getting, I personally, as a golden rule, don't allow any teeth on skin at all. Interestingly, as the dog gets a bit older, I may even allow a bit of that in, but it wouldn't be chewing, it would just be in the form of play with a mature but younger dog, an adolescent dog, maybe 12 months of age, something of that ilk. So watch out for that. If there is any teeth on skin as a puppy, I say no biting. Okay, and you'll note I'm using about that volume and about that tone of voice. You need to say it, and this makes people smile sometimes, but you need to say it like you mean it. So if you're saying no biting, good, no biting, it all sounds tentative, and you may even be enjoying the process. But there's a difference between no biting and no biting. That's quite okay. We're not looking to frighten the dog. We're not shouting at the dog. We're not being heavy-handed, but we are giving a nice, clear definition of you're not to do that, okay? If we can only take that so far, what if your dog ignores that firm tone? Because some dogs will ignore it, whereas many, that's enough, okay? Most dogs are sensitive enough, especially if we use it from the beginning, very beginning, 8 weeks onwards, which is the ideal age for your puppy, to acquire a puppy rather, that we may then need to enforce other methods. So in no particular order, it depends on what works for your dog. You could either just get up if your dog's being too much on you, because this is really the complaint usually with biting and chewing. You can just leave the room. Okay, you could, if your dog's a bit bigger and being a little older, maybe 4 or 5 months plus, and you think your dog's beginning to get an idea of misbehaving, then you may remove your dog from the room just for 1 minute. No shouting, just take the dog out quickly, shut the door, 1 minute. After that minute is up, bring the dog back in. That can be very effective. Okay, and those are sort of two very good examples of different things that you can do to address that. So without having any absolute specifics from you in the sense of that question, that's my little breakdown of and my thoughts around the subject of mouthing and chewing. It is, whenever I do videos on YouTube on this subject, or any podcast, anything of that nature, under the subject of puppies, this is by far and away the most popular, because it is, I'm sure, you know, most puppies, their toilet training comes good in the end, but the chewing and mouthing can persist right into adolescence and even into adulthood, and because it's so incompatible with human living, especially if we sort of imagine how that would go, well, probably that is a better description, because as a behaviour it can deteriorate, and then it becomes more of a problem for you, the owner, because your dog then may be mouthing in people in public, or maybe carrying out these behaviours, less because it's chewing and mouthing, but more because it's being a bit more controlling. So absolutely well worth addressing, and I welcome that question. Thank you.
We've got a couple here that are related, and it's going back to barking, actually.
Ah, yes, great.
Both Bronwyn and Catherine. Catherine says that her dog barks in the car.
Right.
What can she do? And Bronwyn says that her dog barks at nothing, but is doing it at night.
Ah, okay, thank you. So isn't that a lovely example of how a dog barking can bark for completely contrasting reasons? Barking is a communication, and as any experienced dog owner will tell you, they'll be able to listen to their dog's barks by and large, and would be able to discern what the message is behind the bark. If we, just as a quick aside, were to listen to those two barks, one barking in the car and one barking at night, they would sound quite different, I'm sure. Not just because of the breeds and sizes and things, but the sort of message behind the bark. Anyway, barking in the car. Your best case outcome is that you simply get a little rubber hollow toy, you fill it with anything from, I actually had a case with a Labrador a few years ago where the dog would bark incessantly every day on its way to the park. That was easily solved, and some things can be easily solved. It's a Labrador, so you know, he enjoyed his food, but the dog was completely swayed by being given a rubber toy with a little bit of cream cheese inside, and that was just about a teaspoon, and that would be enough smeared on the inside to keep that dog really quiet for 15-20 minutes. And if my memory serves me correctly, after a month or two of using that, and what happens really in the process is that the dog is trained, is probably the best word, to not bark when in the car, but to work on that toy to get the food out. And as a result of that being employed over a period of time, very simply, we change the behaviour, and that device may still be being used for all I know, but essentially it stopped it there and then. But we don't live in a perfect world, and if all of my cases were simply a case of giving a device with some food in it, I could just dispense that advice from the office. It would be a bit easier, save me about 25,000 miles a year in the process. But so, best case scenario, that will work for you. Worst case scenario, your dog will completely ignore that food and continue to bark. There are other methods. We may need a helper, so you may need somebody to sit alongside your dog. That person, assuming again your dog's food driven, that person could be, let's say, clicking and treating. So we'd need to introduce the clicker, and whenever your dog is quiet, we would click to mark that behaviour. This is all assuming the clicker has been introduced prior, maybe for a week, 10 days ahead of this event, and that we click for calm behaviour and then we reward it. So it's always click and treat. Here's one for you, and I have heard of these before, but it came up on a visit only this week, is that the dog was quite insistent on barking on things outside because it was barking at things it could see. Now you can buy you can buy blindfolds for dogs, and I thought, well, that's an ingenious thing, but actually, well, my question was, doesn't he just scrape it off? No, he leaves it on, and this is calm and quiet. So I think that's permissible as an approach, but it's an unusual one. It's just something of interest for you. Another approach is that we can introduce the dog into a cage in the car, or a crate as they're sometimes known. Make sure the crate is big enough for the dog, and that we can then cover it, because what the dog can't see, they usually can't stress about. A month or two travelling in that way could be good, and then once the dog's really calm, what we can begin to do is to, week by week, inch by inch, is to begin to reveal, in keeping with the dog's calm behaviour, more relaxed in keeping with the dog's more relaxed behaviour, we can begin to reveal more view back to the dog, okay? With other vehicles, I've sometimes suggested that we get little templates of card, and they fit in each of the windows if we can't get a dog in a crate. And that they could be either sort of double sticky taped into the windows, and that again they could be adjusted a little bit in keeping with the dog's improved behaviour further down the line. We have dog harnesses, of course, where the dog sits and what it can see. All of these sorts of things have a play on that. Our little Ruby is still sitting in the front footwell for some journeys because we've got two dogs in the rear of the vehicle. So that's another option as well you might like to think about. Okay, so that's barking in the car, a big subject potentially. Could easily, as with all of these questions, spend a couple of hours looking at them, but that's my run off there. The other dog was barking at night for no reason. Now that suggests that there's either something your dog is barking at, so there might be a bit of detective work to be had, or I suspect there's a bigger picture where the dog may be experiencing some anxiety from being alone at night. I've actually, you know, ideally we would always be having a conversation, so I'd be able to check my thinking before I give this advice, but you may well find that if you're content that your dog is happy, it doesn't need to be toileted, it's fed, it's watered, it's warm, it's dry, providing all those basic needs are being met, and well exercised is another one that comes to mind, then it just might be complaining a bit because I don't quite know the age and circumstances that it's being kept in that environment. I would try letting the dog go cold turkey for 2 or 3 nights, and that simply means don't return, because if you do, you sort of make a rod for your own back, especially provided you know that the dog is okay, then it's saying, well, I'm not coming back, because if I come down to you, even though I may be being kind and attentive to the dog, but actually that can be the thin end of the wedge. But it's the sort of thing that ideally I'd like to refine in my thinking before we come up with a plan of action. So it is okay, I believe, to leave a dog to bark a little, but naturally if the barking is absolutely incessant, and I'm actually just putting aside in that statement young puppies, sort of puppies that are 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 weeks, those are a bit of a different kettle of fish, but dogs which are older, barking in the night, we need to sort of think a little bit more in depth as to what the barking might be for. But I hope that helps you. A good subject, the barking, and again, as I say, it just demonstrates for all the different reasons that dogs can bark. Thank you.
We have a couple of cat questions, but they're sort of related. We have Alison has said that she has a cat which has had urine crystals and numerous water infections, and now will do anything but use a litter tray. Help needed to retrain. She has 2 other cats and 5 trays, and they're all kept very clean. And then Jane has an 8-year-old cat which has started staying outdoors and only coming in for food. They've also been feeding a stray cat that comes in. Could it be that?
Well, it could be, just taking these in reverse order. So you already have, as I mentioned earlier, multiple cat household. Nothing wrong with that in essence, but it can lead to some issues. So I would stop that. It's a feral cat that they're feeding.
A stray cat.
A stray cat. Yeah, so I would stop that feeding because it's obviously causing competition. And whilst I understand you're doing something which is very kind and neighbourly, it may actually be confusing matters your end. The first one was with regard to use of the litter tray, wasn't it?
Yes.
On this one, what's the lady's name?
That's Alison.
Alison. On this one, Alison, I would treat your cat a little bit like a kitten. So I would bring back this, come back to the basics in the sense of litter training. So might be a case of once you know your cat has finished eating or has just woken from some activity, I would lead the cat into the litter tray and encourage what you do want. Okay, so that would be a way forward. If your cat is urinating in a place, especially more than a few times where there isn't a litter tray, that I'm sure you've tried this already, but place your tray in that environment or location, or a couple of trays. You can set up litter trays so that you could, and I've just had the little proviso that I need to check this myself, but I'm pretty sure nowadays you can have litter trays that only certain cats can use. So for example, the cat flap we have use here works off the back of my cat's microchip, and it's only she is programmed to come through. Okay, and you could either set up a litter tray that with that type of device, and so only your cat is going in and out, but I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised that you could get, I mean, it's not a cheap option, but I wouldn't be surprised if you could get a litter tray that only individual cats could use. So in a way they have then individual litter trays and that they can't get into each other's litter trays. So that's something I would look into, but very good question. Please let me know how that sounds as advice, and if there's any further things that I should elaborate upon, let me know in the comments below and we'll address that for you. Thank you.
Okay, we have another one here. My dog hates noise and specifically reversing lorries and traffic. Consequently, she won't walk along the road. I have to take her in the car to walks away from traffic. She hides when I pick the lead up to go for a walk and would prefer to stay home.
Oh, how heartbreaking. Well, that's your dog hiding when the lead comes out. That must be very distressing for you. Yes, very, and because, it's one of life's joys, isn't it? Picking up the dog lead or putting your dog, going out, stepping out of the front door with your dog for a walk. This comes under the heading of desensitization, and as you might imagine, to desensitize a dog to something it's not very keen on, well, there are a few key ingredients. Let me list those to assist myself and you in the process. Desensitization, we need very high value food. You might need to experiment a little bit. This is assuming your dog loves his food, her food. If it isn't food, it could be a toy. It might be a favourite squeaky toy that you reserve just for this exercise. We need to start at the back, so to speak, and then work our way forwards, okay? You need to ensure that your equipment on your dog is safe and secure, because an anxious dog near a road could, God forbid, but could in theory rear up on its hind legs, it could spin, it could lie flat to the floor, and in theory dogs can slip out of harnesses. So if your dog is wearing a harness even, make sure that's connect onto a secure neck collar. You can buy little adjacent, about this long, little links, a clip this end, a clip that end, and it helps connect basically the harness to a dog collar. So make sure and ensure that the collar itself is well fitted as well. So the basic premise here, and I'll allow you to sort of fill in the blanks, but the basic premise is that this is what I mean about starting at the back and working our way forwards. Let's imagine, for the purposes of my hand demonstration, that this is the road and this is you and your dog here. And now in the beginning, don't start on a very busy road. Your road will need to be quite quiet, nothing too industrial traffic wise. Also watch out for doing this in the wet. When a car goes down a dry road, that's one thing, but when it's going down a wet road or a road with standing water, that can be a whole new ball game. So make it easy for you and your dog in the beginning. Quiet road, a good distance. Now, what is this distance? Well, the answer to that is that it depends on your dog's behaviour at the given distance. If your dog at 50 feet is calm and can cope with a moderately busy road, then the mission is that we gradually get closer and closer and closer, not just on one session, but keep a mind on where you finished roughly. Don't be too precise about it. It's a bit of a, you'll need to gauge it really. If you can get your dog to sit, to look relatively relaxed, to look at you, to take food from you, or to engage with a little squeaky toy, no real fun and games next to the road, but just like you holding your dog's attention, that would be good enough for me. And you could allow, if it was a ball on a rope, you could allow a little bit of that, and then it would be give, good boy, back in your pocket. That's what I mean about ball interaction. But if your dog can have that interaction or take food from you at that distance, whatever that distance is, then you're good at that location. Don't rush this, by the way, but having said that, we need to reduce those distances so that this sort of scenario would be your dog, say, sitting on the roadside on the pavement with traffic passing by it, okay? So over subsequent days, and this may take you weeks, who knows, that your mission is to reduce the distances, to vary the locations. Now your locations, I suspect you'll be thinking, well, I need a busier road in keeping with your dog's improvement, okay? So once you can get roadside or on the pavement and your dog's still taking food, using that example, in a moderately quiet environment, then you're looking, even that same road, but these are things I've learned over the years, but even that quiet road at, say, school picking up time or rush hour traffic, these quieter roads can in themselves become a lot more busy. So think about not just the location, but the time of day, the day itself. You know, weekends, some roads can be much busier than others. And then think about the variety. Another quick tip whilst we're on this subject is that you could grade, you could sit down with a pen and paper and come up with 2 or 3 columns, green, amber, red. Amber is where you want to be working mainly, because you know then that your dog is finding it a bit of a challenge, but you can work in that environment. And that reds are something you're holding off for later on. So as your dog improves, what today would seem like a red would, in a few weeks' time, feel actually more like an amber and quite doable. Green, tend not to talk about that too much, because that's almost where your dog isn't really being tested, okay? So you want to keep your dog in the amber, draw up a column of amber locations and red locations, and then it just gives you something. Keep a little logbook as you go, and it will give you something to guide you, okay? Because the essence of what you need to do of reducing those distances is actually simplicity itself. The trick, I think, is having a little program. You're not rushing it, but equally you feel that you're gently edging your dog, so to speak, towards that which it currently finds fearful. So it's all about practice, 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 lots of repetition, make the experiences positive, don't force your dog, let your dog be the, generally speaking, let your dog be to lead the way in the sense of, you know, where you are on that amber and red list, okay? I'm aware that we're coming to the end.
A couple of minutes, yes.
Do we have anything
no more,
super simple?
No, not really.
Well, look, there are 2 minutes. There's actually 1 minute, and in 60 seconds, I just want to alert you all to the subject of fireworks, if you're not already thinking about this subject. Now, if not sooner, but now is really the time where, if you know your dog has a fear of fireworks, I encourage you to begin to, basically you can get hold of either MP3s that you can download online. If you look on various streaming services, you can do that. You can also buy DVDs or CDs with professional recordings on. The idea with and this applies even if you have a puppy or which we're looking to desensitize in the first place, or an adult dog with a bit of an existing issue. How long it takes and how much time and effort you put into this would depend on the severity of the problem. But I just want to give you the top and bottom of this thinking. So the idea is that you play that firework music at a barely perceptible volume and combine that with something high value or of interest to your dog. That might be a device with its breakfast in it, or some sticky dog food in a hollow rubber device, and so your dog is happily working on that. Or maybe it could be a bit of training with you, sit down, stay, come here, good boy. All of that so that you're distracting your dog actually whilst that fireworks sound is being played. And you, over successive days, you gradually tweak up the volume, okay? Always observing your dog's behaviour in the process. Speak to your vet if you know your dog has a serious issue. There are a number of herbal and nutritional calming remedies on the market. I'm not a fan of drugging our dogs for fireworks season, although in some extreme cases that may be required, but I'm more a fan of desensitizing well in advance so that we have a genuine solution to the problem. As you all know, fireworks isn't just November the 5th, it's actually, I think, this quarter, October, November, December, even into January, New Year. It can be quite a stressful period, depending on the sort of environment you live in. So those are my closing thoughts on fireworks. I could easily speak to you in much more detail on that another time. So thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for watching today. As always, we look forward to seeing you here on the Petplan Facebook Live, where we can answer your questions. Thank you and have a lovely afternoon. Bye for now.